Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of The Game Plan. This episode is about the Seattle Seahawks versus the San Francisco 49ers on Monday Night Football. If you're new to the show, here's what I do. I break down quickly the key injuries. I run through the key statistics. I run through the key gambler statistics. I'll explain those. I put together a game plan, a path to victory for the Seahawks and for the 49ers. And lastly, I also give you my fantasy football projections for both teams for this game. As I always say before we dig in here, if you could give me 2 seconds of your time for 2 clicks, a like and a subscribe. That basically, long story short, will help us unlock some production features and make these videos better. But let's just go ahead, dig right in, as I like to do quickly, with the injuries. And I got to say the 49ers are starting to get a little bit more healthy. They were really, really banged up. I'm happy to see a couple of these guys are more questionable than doubtful or out. Seattle is fairly healthy as well, which is impressive, this far into the season. For Seattle, only Luke Wilson is questionable. I shouldn't say that. I'm sorry. Tight end offensively, the only offensive player is Luke Wilson, and I think Jacob Hollister is the better tight end there anyway. Quentin Jefferson and Quandre Diggs are both questionable on the defensive side of the ball. For the 49ers, a couple of big names, but all questionable. Their 2 offensive tackles, McGlinchey and Staley, are both questionable now. We'll see if they play, but they were doubtful and out for weeks at a time, and they're still undefeated. So if they get those guys back, that's great. Reserve cornerback, they're questionable. Kicker, obviously you don't want to see your kicker out. We'll see if he plays or not. I'm sure San Francisco will find somebody, but Gold is so so accurate and so stable at that position. You don't like to see a kicker on the of his caliber on the injury report. And then, of course, George Kittle is a big one. I have him, spoiler alert for the fantasy projections, I have him projected quite high this week, so I hope he can go. But, obviously, let's pay attention as we get closer. We have a lot of days before Monday, and we'll see if these guys can play. Now, the next thing I like to do is compare passing units versus defensive units. These rankings are in terms of total yards accumulated and given up throughout the year, and you can see I have offense versus defense and defense versus offense. So Seattle's passing attack, let's talk about the passing first. The passing attack is 9th in the league for Seattle, which is really good. San Francisco's pass defense, first, okay? Pass defense for Seattle, 28th, not so good. San Francisco's 22nd, although I will argue that since Emmanuel Sanders has been acquired, I think he's played 2 weeks, I think the San Francisco passing offense is more like mid-level. I don't think they're bottom third. I think they're probably somewhere today. They're probably somewhere in the half or even top half of the league there. So I think that is a little bit of a misleading stat for the 49ers. As I said last week as well before the game in the deep dive in this game plan episode, I think San Francisco's passing offense was rated poorly, but keep in mind how little they've had to pass to stay in games. I mean, they've been dominating games and playing from ahead and running strong. So I don't think that this ranking is a true ranking for San Francisco's passing ability. I think it's just out of necessity and out of matchup at this point. So I would give the advantage in the passing game based on the defense being number one and Seattle's passing defense, for as bad as it is. I give a slight advantage to San Francisco, but Seattle's obviously very good. I love the wide receivers for Seattle. I think they're the best that Seattle's had since Russell Wilson has been there. Now on the the run side of the ball, Seattle's run offense is 8th. That's really good. San Francisco's run defense is 14th. So Seattle, you would figure, will probably try to attack via the run game there. That is the least path to resistance, I think. And the run defense for Seattle is 13th compared to the second ranked run offense for San Francisco. Again, I give a slight advantage to San Francisco there. So I think the San Francisco 49ers have slight advantages on both sides, but both teams are very, very good. Now, if we get to the gambler statistics, as I just quickly break down what that is if you're a first-time listener here. Professional gamblers, they like to look at a few key metrics. There's a lot more that goes into it, but these are the primary ones. It's yards per play given up, third and fourth down percentage, red zone touchdown percentage, and then your turnovers. So if we look at the yards per play, Seattle's averaging 6 yards per play offensively, which is nice, but San Francisco is giving up only 4.5, which is ridiculous. So if you average those out, you could talk about 1.5. You're looking at about 5.25 yards per play for Seattle offensively. Now, if you look on Seattle's defense, they actually give up more yards per play defensively than their offense does. For a 7-2 team, that's not a usual thing. They're at a net -2, -0.2, I should say. That's not normal, but again, Seattle's very, very good, so I'm not overly concerned about that. However, when you look at 6.2 yards per play given up compared to San Francisco at 5.8, if you take the average out there, that's about 6 yards per play. So we said Seattle was a 5.25. We say San Francisco's at about a, what was it, a 6.0. So San Francisco's basically at an advantage of 0.7 yards per play in this game. That's a pretty hefty advantage in terms of yards per play. One of the bigger ones I've seen as I've been doing these deep dives. You look at their ability, okay, so we see how many yards they gain. How can they stay on the field? How many third and outs? How many third downs can they convert? So on and so forth. You see that the Seattle Seahawks offense converts about 39% of the time, but the San Francisco defense gets off the field basically 73% of the time. They only give up first downs 27%. That's a ridiculous number. It's ludicrous. So advantage to San Francisco's defense there. Offensive or defensive third down conversion versus offensive. San Francisco converts about 48.6% of the time. Frankly, I'd expect it to be a little higher for San Francisco, but it's not. That's fine. Seattle's third down defense isn't bad, but when you take out third down conversion, offensively and defensively, again, I give a slight advantage to San Francisco. Fourth down conversion, about the same. I mean, Seattle's pretty decent, but San Francisco's converting 80% of their fourth downs. That's ridiculous. They're giving up very little in terms of fourth down conversions, and Seattle is giving up, a little bit, but again, if you weight these things out, San Francisco has another little advantage there, I would say. Then red zone, Seattle does a great job in the red zone, 67%. I think that's probably the big primary win, I guess, for Seattle, is they're more likely to convert those red zone series basically into touchdowns. But again, Seattle's defense, or San Francisco's defense, is very good. Conversely, Seattle's defense gives up a little bit more. So I give the slight edge to Seattle there to get more touchdowns in the red zone, but they have to get to the red zone. As we've seen, San Francisco is pretty darn good at getting off the field on third downs. Turnover margin, pretty negligible to me. Seattle is doing better there than San Francisco in terms of turnover margin, but it's not like, like we saw last week with New England and Baltimore. It's not like a two possession per game advantage. So, but as we saw last week with New England and Baltimore, hey, Baltimore won that game in spite of that. So these numbers don't always mean everything. But let's talk about the game plan. How are these two teams going to attack each other? First thing is, Arizona, what I said last week in the game plan is nobody's really run straight at San Francisco, and I think Arizona did not run the ball enough. I think they were getting some room and some space there, and I know game plan has a lot to do with it, but I would say that Seattle is built with a better power running game. I think you got to run Chris Carson. I think you got to run him up the middle. I think you got to run him at Bosa. You got to tire this defensive line down. I said the same thing last week with respect to Arizona. The difference here is Seattle will commit to the run, and I think they can execute that. And when you make the defensive line a little bit more tired, things start to open up a little bit more in the passing game. Russell Wilson have a little bit more time to throw. He's elusive in the pocket anyway. He's got really good wide receivers. Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf is coming on. I like the way this offensive line matches up with the defensive line in the running game. I think Seattle can get some things going there. Again, San Francisco has the advantage, but I think Seattle matches up pretty well with San Francisco in this game. I think it's a big game for both teams. San Francisco has the edge in basically every statistical category. So one of the things is I think Seattle has to be a little bit more aggressive on fourth down. I think they have to extend drives. We talked about the red zone percentage. They're already doing pretty well in there. They have to stay on the field. They cannot get off the field on third downs. You cannot keep this defensive line strong for San Francisco. So you need to steal a possession. Maybe if they get a turnover or two turnovers earlier in the game from San Francisco, maybe they don't have to be as aggressive, but I think they have to steal 1 to 2 possessions in this game to have a shot at pulling it off. San Francisco last week, it seemed there aren't many weaknesses, as I've mentioned, with their defense. But one thing I've noticed in recent weeks is teams are attacking them in the screen game with their running backs. I don't say this often, but I think Rashad Penny is a nice matchup. I think they can use him and Chris Carson in the screen game. Maybe some bubble screens, but I don't think those will be as successful. Maybe a guy like Hollister, but I don't think that will be as successful. I think you're really looking at running backs in the flats and trying to break something open there. And again, I'll say that teams have been able to it seems like elude the pass rush a little bit. Well, I shouldn't even say that because San Francisco is really good, but I think Russell Wilson is somebody that can elude the pass rush, and he's going to have to be slippery in this game because people are going to be on top of him all game. They're going to be, trying to sack him and everything. Containing Russell Wilson's tough. He's one of the best pocket quarterbacks in terms of sliding and working the pocket in the league. Russell Wilson's going to have to work his magic this week. He's going to have to basically keep his jersey clean, get out, and maybe utilize some safe run plays. Some design run plays where he slides and just doesn't get tagged, because and Russell Wilson's great at that. Now, how does San Francisco attack Seattle? Well, I got to say Seattle. It's their liabilities in the passing game. I would say you saw that secondary. I mentioned about how the acquisition of Sanders has helped a little bit. San Francisco hasn't had to pass. I think they're going to pass again. We saw it last week with Garoppolo throwing 4 touchdowns. Is that going to happen again? I don't know. But Garoppolo, I think, will find some opportunities. Deebo Samuel, Emmanuel Sanders, and Kittle as well. I think Kittle is one of my notes below there. But obviously stick with the run as usual. Their run game is fantastic. I know Seattle's run defense is strong, but test it. It makes a big difference physically when you can lean on the defensive line all game. I'm saying the same thing for Seattle. I think probably the better running attack in this game is probably going to win the game, and that includes Seattle. Seattle can win that line of scrimmage battle offensively. I think they have a really good chance. Now, my pick is going to be San Francisco close. I believe at this point the game spread is San Francisco minus 5.5, so they're 5.5 point favorites. I'm actually going to take San Francisco to win the game and Seattle to cover that spread. Seattle's linebackers aren't the best while covering. That's what I was saying before about Kittle. I think you can work Kittle. I think he's actually my top rated tight end in terms of daily fantasy analytics. I love this matchup for him. Outside of Arizona, playing tight ends against Seattle is like one of my favorite things to do. So if Kittle is healthy, and hopefully he is, I would play him. If he isn't healthy, then get the backup tight end there and insert him in some lineups. Seattle, I mentioned, needs to steal a possession earlier. San Francisco, I don't think you need to be too aggressive. Don't get overly aggressive on 4th down and flip the field position. I think that you have the advantage. San Francisco has the advantage in this game. So they don't need to do anything crazy. They don't need to go for, a bunch of like 4th and 5s. I think you can safely punt the ball if you're at the 50-yard line or something. And there's like a 4th and 4 or something like that. Just don't be overly aggressive unless you see the game kind of starting to slide away, or if the turnovers are starting to get out of whack, then maybe you can be a little bit more aggressive. But San Francisco, I think you can call off the dogs a little bit with respect to 4th down and taking more chances. Take your field goals when you get in the red zone. Take your points. I think the advantage is there, but you're never Russell Wilson's never out of it, so don't be afraid to pile on the points even if you have a lead. Let me get you to the fantasy football analytics here. So Russell Wilson, these are not great projections. My analytics like San Francisco's defense to shut down the Seattle Seahawks, but like I said last week, the analytics were similar in the New England and Baltimore game. Baltimore's line across the board, just very low point values. And I said, you know what? I don't think that's going to be the case. I think Baltimore will be able to get some stuff. I think the same is true with Seattle. I think Russell Wilson will outperform this projection. I think Chris Carson will outperform this projection. And I think Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, I think they might have tough matchups, but you want to look at some of those secondary receivers like a more Hollister, I think is a fringe start at tight end, but I like him a little bit. But I do not like this defense and special teams unit for Seattle. For San Francisco, again, Jimmy Garoppolo, I think he outperforms this a little bit with respect to the matchup. I do like him throwing maybe for a couple touchdown passes. Tevin Coleman, I do like him to get in the end zone as well. Breida, he's not my favorite play this week. Sanders, I think, is likely to outperform this, as well as Deebo Samuel this week. I don't like Bourne or Goodwin or Pettis or any of the other wide receivers there, but I do love George Kittle. If he can play, assuming he's healthy, I like him. And the defense and special teams, honestly, this is, I think, number one projection this week for defense and special teams. I think this is going to be a lower game for San Francisco. I think Seattle will get opportunities to score in this game. So while I would still safely play San Francisco's defense, I don't think they're going to be the number one unit this week. It's just my gut telling me that. My analytics disagree. I don't always agree with my analytics. But certainly if I had the 49ers defense, I would have no problem playing them. I think they will, be still a top 5, top 10 defense, just because their ability to get to the quarterback and force turnovers. So there you go. There's another deep dive against San Francisco, Seattle. I do a couple other games. I have the Raiders and the Seahawks already out. I'll be pushing out probably the New Orleans Saints and Atlanta Falcons game pretty soon here as well. Check those out. Check out the game previews, and check out our entire Week 10 playlist. We have a lot of good stuff out there. I always prime you for the season, for the next week, whether it's fantasy football or whether it's daily fantasy football or fantasy football. So, or against the spread betting. So there you go. There's another episode. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.